So our first guest is Ashton Lattimore, and she is a lawyer by profession. I believe she did. And this is her first novel. And as you all know, historical fiction is my very favorite genre. And so when I saw that this book was going to be discussed on the show tonight, I ordered my copy. So I have a copy of All We Were Promised. It's by Ashton Lattimore. So Ashton, welcome to Black Office Matter TV.
Thank you so much for having me. I'm excited to be here.
And thank you for being here. We're happy to have you.
Okay, so you now you're the one, yeah, you used to be a lawyer, you said.
I
So you
was.
don't practice law at all anymore?
Nope, not anymore. I practiced for about 4 years before I sort of woke up one day and admitted, I don't like this very much. I would prefer to I would prefer to go back to writing. I was a journalist before I was a lawyer, and after
Oh,
I stopped practicing, I became a journalist again, and started my novel shortly thereafter. So I think, I always sort of had the writer bug, and it just took me a while to kind of step away from the law and let it be what it was going to be.
Well, so
well,
you truly pursued your first love.
Yes, yes, absolutely. My
Right.
first love. Yeah. I've been writing stories since I think like fifth grade when we first got our PC at home, with Windows 95 and all that kind of stuff. And I was printing out stories and giving them to my fifth grade teacher. Like it was a whole thing. So yes, I'm very much back to my roots now.
yeah, a lot of writers start off in childhood writing.
Mhm.
So that's very common. And then some get an epiphany later on in life and it's therapeutic, or they have something to get off their chest, or they just decide they want to go in a different direction. But writing from childhood is very common among writers. And so I was writing in childhood too. I'm a writer as well. Both of us are writers as well as hosts of the show. So we understand the motivation behind it, the passion, the
Yes.
calling is really,
Yep.
a
It is.
gift.
It's a calling. It sticks with
Mhm.
you. It
It
really
does.
does. Yeah.
It does.
Well, it looks like the passion for research stuck with you. So being a lawyer takes a lot of writing, it takes a lot of research, and you kept all of that. Is that what helped you and drove you when you started writing your historical fiction novel?
Absolutely. Yeah. I have a huge, huge love for research. That's also something that's been with me since childhood. And it served me really well as a lawyer. And also as a journalist, you really have to like digging into the facts of things and finding out what happened and reading old documents and things like that. And I took such joy in that. And I've always found history so interesting. So I think when I decided I was going to write a novel, there was never any question that it was going to be historical fiction, because that's mostly what I read. And that sort
Yes,
of research process for me is like two-thirds of the fun, I think.
I understand. What was it that drove you to this particular subject that you wrote about? Not so much historical fiction, but the subject of your story.
So I first got the idea actually when I was working in Philadelphia. So I worked downtown. So the city's very historic. There are a lot of streets that look the same now as they looked like 200 years ago. So on my lunch break, I would often go and look around at historical sites and things like that. And I came across one, the President's House exhibit, which is down on Independence Mall. And it's where George Washington lived when it was the capital of the United States, when Philadelphia was the capital. And this exhibit is actually dedicated to the people he enslaved who worked in the president's house while he was president. And there's where I learned about this loophole in Pennsylvania's abolition law. They ended slavery very gradually, starting in like 1780. But the way that the law worked, it still allowed slave owners from other states to bring their slaves with them into the state for up to 6 months and keep them enslaved. And then what the slave owners were doing was taking them back and forth to kind of like reset the clock so that the slaves wouldn't end up free. And George Washington was one of the people who was doing this.
That's
So
a
I
lot
learned
of
that.
energy.
It is a lot of effort to keep people from having their freedom. You get
Right.
to the
You
five
had
and a
to
half
really
month
work
mark.
hard to do that.
Yeah, yeah. They would get to the 5.5 month mark and be like, oh, I need you to run an errand to me, back down to Virginia. Because they're not telling them why they're doing it, right? Because
Right.
they don't want them to know that this freedom is available to them. So when I learned about that law, I was just interested in figuring out how to craft a story that had that loophole kind of at the center of it. And that loophole was in effect up until I think it's 1847. So I was kind of boxed in to a particular time period. And I started learning more about Philadelphia during this time and how there were a lot of race riots that happened in the 1830s and 1840s. And that's why I eventually landed on 1837 and 1838, which were some of the more volatile years in that period.
Wow. A lot of people always think that the northern states were more enlightened.
Mhm.
And in some ways they were, but they had their issues during slavery and after civil rights. I mean, they were, and still today, there's
Yeah,
not a lot of the most segregated cities are north of the Mason-Dixon line
exactly,
in terms of
exactly.
residential.
Residential and educational too. Some of the most
Yes,
segregated school
yes.
systems, I think, are actually in New York State. But that's something that I kind of wanted to capture with this story, this sort of untold history of what it was like in the North to be a Black person before emancipation, before the Civil War, where you're technically free, but there are still a whole lot of people around who don't want you to be, and who are looking to make these compromises with the Southern states that, really put your life and your freedom at stake, which is what was going on in Pennsylvania. We kind of learn about it in history class. Pennsylvania is this haven for abolitionists. We've got the
Mhm.
Quakers. Everything's all right here for Black people. And, yeah, a little, but there was very much this other piece of the story that I was hoping to bring forward in this novel.
So tell us about the story itself, the characters, the plot line.
Sure. So the story centers on a young woman, Charlotte, who is a housemaid, and she was formerly enslaved and escaped from her plantation in Maryland with her father, who is this white passing tradesman who is now in Philadelphia, and he's passing for white. So she lives as his housemaid, and she befriends this wealthy abolitionist Black woman in Philadelphia. These are both young women, kind of coming of age, 19, 21 years old, and this wealthy abolitionist kind of gets her involved in these elevated social circles. So she's kind of rubbing shoulders with the Black elite and starting to begin to see what a new life for her could look like when this figure from her past shows up, Evie, who's this young girl who was enslaved on the plantation with her, and the two of them were like sisters, who Charlotte left behind when she and her father ran from the plantation. And Evie shows up with, a pretty deep sense of betrayal at having been left behind, and basically demands, I'm here with the plantation mistress now, but you're going to help me get free. That's what you owe me after this. And it's the story of how these three young women work together to get Evie freed from slavery and, discover for themselves what freedom really is going to look like for them in this northern city.
Okay, so
Wow,
this
it sounds
depicts them
like
on the cover. It has
there it is.
the three women on
Hmm.
there. And I haven't delved into it yet because my to be read shelf is so
Yeah.
it's expanded beyond the shelf. It's in a basket. It's on the
Oh
table.
no.
I have so many books, but it is in the queue. So it sounds like a very interesting story and a
Yeah,
little
with a
bit
lot of
different.
layers.
Yeah, a lot of layers and a little bit different um, in terms of the angle that you took,
Mhm.
which you have to, when you create a story, you have to have a plot.
Mhm.
And now your work as a lawyer helped you with what the research you did for the book. Can you tell us about that,
Sure.
how your work as a lawyer? And were you still practicing law when you started writing the book?
No, I had just stopped about 6 months before I started writing the book. So it was all still in there. But
Okay.
I wasn't doing it day to day, but it was really helpful. Partially because of, what I was saying earlier about the 6 month law, this loophole. I needed to really get to the granular level of how this worked every day in practice. So a lot of what I ended up doing were reading old cases where enslaved people would like bring their enslavers before the court and say, I'm free because I've been up here 6 months. And the court would either say, yes, you are, or no, you're not, because there was some technicality or something like that. So reading a lot of cases, old cases, from like the 1830s and the late 18th century, about how this law worked in practice. So that was the biggest piece of sort of legal research that I needed to do around these issues. And then a lot of it was just sort of historical context and research, but having those tools from my legal background, kind of knowing how to navigate the libraries, how to navigate online resources, and all the other kind of places that I was able to look to find facts and details and sort of legal frameworks was really, it was useful. And it made me feel like I hadn't, put my law degree to waste, at least. I found a way to kind of craft something around it so I could say,
Right.
hey, mom, hey, dad, I got something out of this after all. It's okay.
So when you were doing your research and you're reading these old cases, did you find that the courts were more biased against the Black people? That's what I thought. Was that something that you already had the expectation of as you went into that research, and it just kind of
Yeah.
simplified it for you?
I expected it. I expected it. The cases came out, I would say maybe like 70-30, with the 70 going to the enslaver, a number of times. There were some cases where judges were fairly sympathetic to what enslaved people were arguing, or where it was just a clear enough slam dunk case that there really was no argument. But in the cases where there was sort of a gray area, like, where somebody had been here 6 months and they were counting the months by the phases of the moon, but the court wanted to count them by the calendar date. So the court said, no, you're actually not free, little stuff like that. And it's a shame to think that it's kind of those tiny little details that would make the difference
Right.
between somebody being free or, potentially being enslaved for the rest of their life. But that's really how it worked back then.
Very sad.
Hmm.
Yeah.
So how were you able to, what form or the details of the court cases in for you to research? Was it
They
on
They were
what?
on some of them I think were in like the legal databases like LexisNexis and like Westlaw. You can go and read these really, really old cases, but a lot of them are so old that they're just available for free online, like outside of any databases. So there were a few articles by law professors where they had collected a lot of them, law professors who'd studied these issues. So they were just available kind of freely, and they took the form of judicial decisions. So it would be the judge's opinion and their decision at the end of the case on how it was going to come out. And they would recite all the facts of the case and then say, because of X, Y, and Z, this person's free or this person's not free. So it was all helpfully kind of laid out there just to pull from.
Okay,
So
because
did
I
you
don't
ever
think they
get
had court
surprised?
reporters back then.
Yeah. I'm just wondering, did you ever get surprised and like, they're not going to let this person go free? And they actually did. Did you
A
find a
few
case like
times,
that?
yeah. A few times, yeah.
Well, what were the extenuating circumstances?
I think in one case, one of the extenuating circumstances was it was like a woman and her child, and it was something about where the child was born, like having been born maybe in Philadelphia or in Pennsylvania after this gradual emancipation law. So I think maybe the child actually ended up free, and I can't remember if the mother ended up free as well, but it was something like that. It had something to do with kind of less with the 6-month piece of things and like what their status was under the law kind of to begin with, whether or not they were able to be considered free. Because what the gradual emancipation law did in Philadelphia was when it was passed in 1780, it didn't free anybody then, but what it did was say you are going to remain enslaved, but your children who are born to you will be indentured servants for I think a period of 25 to 28 years. And then they'll be freed and their children will be born free. So it's sort of the similar way, like in the South, where the status follows the mother, down from the mother to the child, whether they're enslaved or free. But it had this kind of extra period of indentured servitude in it to kind of complicate things a little bit. But that's how some of the court cases would turn.
I bet they framed that indentured servitude like it's only 28 years.
Oh, yes.
No, I'm like
Yes.
28 years. That's a
No
whole
big
lot.
deal.
That's
Right.
That's almost your whole
a
life back
lifetime.
then.
I
Exactly.
mean,
They were
people,
probably like, it's only 28 years and then you can go free and live your life.
Mhm.
because
Yeah.
the life expectancy back then was
Yep.
probably 50 years old. I mean,
Hmm.
it wasn't people live to be 80 now, but back then they didn't for a variety of reasons,
Yeah.
medical, you just didn't have the same health situation like we do now with medicine, and, medications. Or if somebody got hurt on like the farm, they could,
Yeah.
cut something off and bleed out before, you know, they could seek
Yeah.
help. It's just all kinds of things.
All kinds of
Mm.
things. And you know, you're working for this person who enslaved your mom. That's like your
Mhm.
boss when you're an indentured servant. So, you know, psychologically, it has to feel like a pretty bad situation, on top of just, you know, the sheer amount of time and years that they kind of stole from people under this system of indentured servitude. And, you know, that was another situation where people would kind of use it to their advantage, how much Black people or indentured servants knew or didn't know about the law, or even how old they were, or you know, what year were they born? When is the 28 years up? Those are the kinds of things where people would, you know, kind of take advantage of their situation.
Of course. And with the 6 month clock, even with that, because the ability to read
Yep.
and write was so limited, I don't know if they could even read calendars. So that's why you were
Yeah.
talking about the phases of the moon and things
Exactly.
like that, what
Yeah.
they were using that to determine how long they had been there.
Hmm. Yeah, it
So,
was
Mm.
not a situation that was set up to advantage us at all. Not in any way. But you know, people did persevere through it, and some people did make their way through those loopholes. So people figured it out, but it wasn't easy by any stretch.
Now your book was just recently released, like about a week ago.
Yep, just a week ago.
So how has the reception been so far?
It's been really nice. It's been great. I spent last week doing a couple of events at some local bookstores. I live outside of Philly now. I live in Bryn Mawr. So I was doing some events in towns around here. And it was just really cool to get a chance to connect with readers and share with them the story, the research that went into it, and hopefully entice them to pick up the book. I saw a few people leaving the store, you know, having bought the book, and I got to sign a few. So it was just a really nice introduction to kind of being an author. So I've been having a good time, and it seems like the book's been received well by the folks who have read it so far. So just hoping that it finds more readers.
Wonderful.
you know what?
Congratulations. I
Yeah,
love
Thank
it.
you.
I love a new book.
me too. I think it's great. And you have some upcoming book events as well that you are
Yes.
working on. You have something this weekend.
Yes, I have something later this week. I'm going to be in conversation with a friend of mine in Rhode Island. That's going to be a Facebook Live event later this week. And then in May, there's an event in Morristown, New Jersey, where I'm going to be on a panel with other local authors, folks from the area, talking about all of our recently released books. So a few things coming up. Yeah.
Okay. Now I have another question about just that time period and with people. Pennsylvania seems to be a interesting state in terms of just, it was one of the early colonies.
Mhm.
You have Philadelphia as the city of brotherly love. And then, but a lot of, I think Pennsylvania is like a pathway to Canada for a lot of people who escaped slavery.
Mhm.
And then they were in Pennsylvania in Harriet Tubman. I know in the movie
Yep.
that was depicted there, and I think 12 Years a Slave, if I'm not mistaken, but I can't remember where he ended up when he was free. That
Hmm.
was a hard movie to watch. It was just so.
It was. Yeah.
I've only seen it once. Some
Me too.
movies
Yeah.
once is
Just one
enough.
time is enough. Yeah.
Once is enough.
Yeah.
So,
There are
but
some movies I just cannot watch more than once, and that's one
right.
of them.
That's
Yeah,
one of
that's
them.
one of them. It was just so, and it was accurate. That's that there were actual people that were, brutalized in that way,
Yeah.
and so, but did a lot of people end up escaping, like that went for the 6 months?
Hmm.
Did they end up escaping? Did your research uncover any of that?
Yes, yeah, there are people who ended up escaping. And Pennsylvania, because it was basically the southernmost northern state, so it's right on the border with Maryland. Philadelphia in particular was a huge space for fugitive slaves where they would end up, whether they became free when they arrived, because of the 6 month law, or because, you know, they ran from someone in another state, and ended up free that way. So Philadelphia really is like the birthplace of the Underground Railroad. So you have Harriet Tubman, who was here doing a lot of her work, William Still, who documented a lot of the early work of the Underground Railroad, who I think shows up in the movie Harriet as well, was based in Philadelphia. So part of the story is really seeing these characters and the historical figures around them, sowing the early seeds of the Underground Railroad. It wasn't being called that at this time. It starts getting called that, I think, sometime around the 1840s. But in 1837, 1838, you start seeing these committees. They're called vigilance committees, the Philadelphia Vigilance Committee. And they are groups of Black men in particular who are patrolling the streets, looking out for slave catchers to make sure that they're not snatching up free Black people or fugitive Black people off the streets. And they're also very quietly also helping enslaved people escape. So you have many of the wealthy abolitionists who worked and lived in Philadelphia would have these secret rooms in their houses to house enslaved people as sort of a way station for them to get further north.
Interesting. I
Yeah.
live in Maryland myself, and I know you probably know about the beautiful mural of Harriet Tubman, and depicts her. It looks like she's coming out of a brick wall, and she's standing there coaxing you to come on and be free. It's a, I mean, you can almost see her eyes following you as you're looking at that mural. But I love to drive out there and just spend time there.
Yeah, yeah. It's beautiful. It really is beautiful. And it was really exciting to kind of get to see and like through my research, understand what kind of framework she came into when she arrived in Philadelphia, what kind of infrastructure was already here and how it got there for her to kind of start doing the work that she was doing with the Underground Railroad and kind of going back and getting people and bringing them up through these kind of way stations. So it was an education for me. So it was really exciting.
Now, one of our regular viewers, Gwen Hayes, said she lives not far from Bryn Mawr.
Oh, okay.
Yeah, and I had a really good friend from years ago. We still keep in touch, but I met her when I was in college. She was older than me, but she went to Bryn Mawr. She didn't
Okay.
finish, but she went there, I think, for 2 years. And so she said it was very how did she describe it? Well, the wealthy women went there for the most
Yeah.
wealthy white women. There's not too many Black people that went to Bryn Mawr. In fact, she's the only person I ever met that went there that I
Oh, yeah.
personally have met that went there. You
Yeah.
know, of all the people I met.
I
Well, I'm
think they've
sure you must have.
diversified somewhat in some, in recent decades, but I don't know how much.
Yeah, but it was a while back when she went.
Yeah.
So
I'm sure you must have connected with Harriet's bookstore in Philadelphia.
Yes, yeah, I am in touch with them. I sent them a finished copy of the book as soon as it was ready last week, and I'm hoping to get out there sometime in the next few weeks to sign copies of the book if they have them there. But yes, love Harriet's bookstore.
yes, we've had her on the show. And then what's the other one in Philadelphia? It's Uncle something.
Uncle Bobby's. Yep.
Uncle Bobby's. I always want to say Uncle Buddy. But anyway, yeah, that one too. That one is one, if you haven't connected with them, you
Yes.
should do that. Now, I have another question about that 6-month law. Was that exclusive to Pennsylvania, or was it something that they adopted in other states?
As far as I know, it was just Pennsylvania, but I didn't end up doing research into the laws of other states. So it's possible that other states had something similar going on, but I can't say for sure. Yeah.
It kind of reminds me of Louisiana had the Code Noir, the Black Code.
Yes. Yep.
So it kind of reminds me of that law. So
Yeah.
They had something in Ohio. Seems like Ohio had something where
It's possible.
they had I think if you went there, I think they could return you to your slave master.
Yeah. Yeah. A lot of states had laws like that, especially starting in the 1850s, like after the fugitive slave law shows up. That's a national kind of federal law. A lot of states would start having these laws where where the state would have to return you. And southern states also would have like almost the reverse of the 6-month law. That is one thing that I do know. Some southern states where if you were a free Black person and you came down to a southern state and stayed too long, you would lose. So it's like almost the inverse in North and south. Yeah.
And I
Wow.
don't think it was 6 months. I think it was 30
Oh no,
days.
I think it was, yeah.
Yeah.
It wasn't that
They
long. They
taking
didn't
their
want,
chances now.
yeah, they didn't want too many of free Black people hanging around.
No, bad influences. That's,
Right.
and
Yeah.
some other people would end up leaving, which of course they would. So, so anyway, Ashton, we want people to go out and get All We Were Promised. It
Yes.
just came out. It's historical fiction, and it sounds like a very good read. And I plan to read it myself.
Thank
So
you so
thank you for
much.
being a guest on Black Authors Matter TV.
Thank you so much for having me.
And the link is in the chat, ladies and gentlemen. So please just scroll up, click on the link, and support this book. It sounds like an amazing read. So I'm looking forward to reading it myself.
Thank you.
Thank you. You have a great night.
You too. Bye.
Bye bye.